We ask that you silence all of your cell phones and other devices at this time if you have not already. If you are not the applicant and you'd like to speak on a matter, we ask that you sign one of these white forms that are available outside to let us know that you'd like to speak on a matter and what matter. If you're not the applicant, we request that you limit your comments to 5 minutes and that you not interrupt any board members while they're speaking. The first item on our agenda today is to receive the minutes from the July 18th meeting. Do we have any changes to the minutes? I know I had one change I've talked to city staff about, and I think it's going to be addressed. But other than that, do I have a motion?
I move to receive the minutes of July 18th, 2019.
A second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second to receive the minutes from the July 18th meeting. Please cast your votes. And minutes are approved. Next order of business is continuance requests and applications for withdrawals. I understand that there are a few continuance requests.
Yes, we have item number 15, case number 14642 is to be deferred to September 5th. Item number 16, case number 14644, deferred to September 5th. Item number 17, case number 14631, being deferred to September 5th. And item number 18, case number 14616, deferred to September 5th, 2019.
Is anyone here to speak on any of those matters? Are there any other matters wanting to be continued or withdrawn? We have a motion to continue those requests.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to continue the applications for case number 15, 16, 17, and 18 as requested. Please cast your votes. And the motion is approved.
We have item number 1, case number 14633, request for a variance to the maneuvering on street right-of-way and maximum sign height, size, and location on street right-of-way in the DTD1 Downtown Transitional Limited District located at 820 North Classen Boulevard.
Is the applicant present? Great. And for this case, I will need to recuse, and my understanding is Mr. Privet will take over as chair.
Sir, if you want to step to the podium. Yes.
Okay. And you just tell us about your case?
Yes, my name is Steve Mason. I'm the owner of Mason Realty Investors. 14 months ago, we purchased a motel at 8th and Classen. It was built in the 1960s. We're in the process of renovating it and making it nice. There's 2 matters before you. There's a historic sign from the 1960s that doesn't meet today's code location, and we're requesting that it be allowed to remain. We're going to update the sign and clean it up. Also, the right-of-way for Classen Boulevard extends about halfway into what I'll call the parking lot, and we're requesting to be able to continue to use that part of the right-of-way for a driveway.
Board members? No? You got 2?
Could you explain a little bit about your application and how it was previously reviewed by the Downtown Design Committee for the board, please?
Right. It was reviewed by the Downtown Design Review Committee and approved, and then it was moved on to you guys to look at it because 2 variances were required from City Code. And they were in support of our application to improve the motel and improve the vitality and business and excitement on Classen.
And can you tell us a little bit about the use of the right-of-way? I believe, according to your application, had been already in use, the right-of-way. You're just changing the angle of it. Or
Yes. The existing conditions have been there since the 60s. Currently, there's like perpendicular parking against the building. We're going to go in and put in some diagonal parking, which is actually not in the right-of-way because there's a dotted line you see below the parking. So the change to the parking is on our property, and the request to continue to use the driveway that's been used since the 60s is in this application. One important change we're making from a traffic standpoint is right now, what you see in the application, there's 2 curb cuts. What's there today, it's just continuous, you can pull in. So actually we're improving the traffic safety there by putting the 2 driveways in versus the entire thing being open. And we're adding a sidewalk.
I believe you earlier at the board commission meeting mentioned that the signage, the original sign of the old, is it Holiday Inn or whatever the hotel was, couldn't all be found. Did you replicate that, or can you go into that a little bit about the signage?
Yeah, what is missing from the sign, and you see it in the diagram on the right, are the 3 globes that were there before. On the current picture you see on my left, you see 2 arms coming up that had globes on it. We believe we've located the center globe here in Oklahoma City. And then we're going to put the 3 globes up there of this 1960 kinds of modernist architecture. The best example being the crazy building at the LAX airport looks like the alien landing. That's kind of that architecture from the 60s. The gold dome is an example that we're trying to protect and preserve.
It looks like a pretty cut and dry application to me. I mean, I like the reason the sign and actually maybe helping parking a little bit.
Yes, sir.
It's kind of hard to deal with that with the motel. I can support it.
This has been in place since I've been driving downtown, since I was quite a bit younger, and it's been there. It's part of history, and you're improving it, and the signage is pretty much in place, except with with the improvements of the parking. And it was reviewed by the Downtown Design, and they wholeheartedly recommended its approval for us to consider the variances that you've requested.
Yes, ma'am. I'm a preservationist. I have 38 urban core buildings that we've preserved, and the character of these buildings is important to our community.
I also feel comfortable supporting this application, and I'll make a motion to approve case number 14633 for the reason that it meets the statutory requirements for the variances.
I will second that.
And variance passes.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Item number 2, case number 14637, request for a variance to the required number of parking spaces in the C4 General Commercial District located at 1845 Linwood Boulevard.
Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Lovelady, and I'm the owner of 1845 Linwood. It is a warehouse. We bought it 2 or 3 years ago. It's prior to us purchasing it was a warehouse for electrical supply. We have leased the building to a grow operation that will have 1 employee and no retail activity. It is a former retail building, I think back maybe in the 20s and 30s, with the entrance to that building on Linwood Avenue. To pull a building permit, the city is asking for us to put in a hard surfaced lot behind the building, which would, even if the building were in commercial use, not be where you would park to then walk all the way around the building to go into it. And on top of that, of course, it's never been a parking lot, but we have some pretty severe flooding issues at that intersection. The police often have to, at any kind of flash flood, block that intersection off. My neighbor to the right has said, when I first bought the building, invest in sandbags, which we did. However, the homeless people like to take those sandbags and sandbag the actual storm drains so that it doesn't get their space wet. So anyway, there's multiple issues in this area. We're working hard with a group of owners in that area to help, bring this up, and we've had some good success with code enforcement and putting these buildings into use. So anyway, I'm seeking relief from the hard surface parking lot in the back of a building that's not for retail use.
Where will the employees park?
They can park along the street, or they could certainly pull up into that grassy area if they wanted to. There's a privacy fence in the back with grass back there. And so, if someone wanted to pull up through there, I wouldn't, because it would rut up the grass, but you certainly could load and unload things if you wanted to there. But there's parking along Linwood, a dedicated lane for that, and then also along Kentucky.
Are there any other licenses granted for this location other than the grow? Like a dispensary license or something like that? Mm. Okay. Board members, any questions?
Yes. I'm having problems with just the grassy knoll in the back of the premises, and I just nearly died with construction trying to go through Linwood today. But it's getting kind of a crowded area. I was wondering if in your consideration, instead of hard pave, you'd consider gravel or some kind of rock parking area in the back in lieu of hard surface pavement.
Yes, that would be at least a concession on the permeable issue with the flooding. But I think adding a whole lot more concrete is just going to, make it worse.
Any other questions or comments? Is anyone else here to speak on this case? Ms. Lewis, were you thinking of a variance that's conditioned on a gravel or something other than hard surface? Or?
I was, on condition that there would be gravel. I don't know whether we should call it gravel or stone or what kind of parking in the back. I'd ask the clerk for suggestions on that.
It would probably be best to go with the gravel. We could go with a 1 or 2 inch amount of gravel on the property. It'd still drain with gravel there.
So the drainage would not be a problem on the flooding if we did it. It's gravel, 1 or 2 inch gravel, or we just say gravel as a motion.
Would you be agreeable to something like
I
that?
would.
Okay. Would you be agreeable to a temporal limitation, like a 10-year?
Sure.
I'm just considering future uses, and this variance would continue in perpetuity.
I agree. I think this area is going to be a great area, and it's one that's been long neglected by the city, and I think there's a lot of activity down there now and a lot of investment, and so I expect this building going to a much higher use in 2 to 3 years. So I completely agree.
Yeah. Okay. We have a motion?
Okay, I move the approval of the variance for a period of 1 year.
Maybe a bit longer. I was thinking
10 years.
I was thinking about 10 years.
10 years.
Something like that. I don't know what the rest of the board thinks, but I just thought 1 year might be a little short. But
Yeah, I was thinking 5 or 10, so.
yeah.
I will amend my own motion. Yes. I will move to approve the variance for a period of 10 years, conditioned upon the fact that there will be gravel parking provided in the back.
Second. A motion and a second to approve case number 14637 for the reasons that it meets the statutory conditions for a variance, subject to condition of a 10-year variance, and that there will be gravel as its surface. Please cast your votes. And the variance is granted.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Item number 3, case number 14643, application of Southern Hills Kids United Methodist Church Academy to allow child care center in the R1 Single Family Residential District located at 8200 South Pennsylvania Avenue.
Hello, my name is Glenda Hibbets, and I'm here representing Southern Hills United Methodist Church at 8200 South Penn. We have opened Kids Academy Christian Child Care Center, and we're filing for a special exemption R1. We were told when we put up a professional sign out front for the daycare that we needed a building permit, and so we moved forward with that and completed all of our inspections. And I had a conversation on the phone about zoning issues. As the conversation ended, I was told that the zoning issue was taken care of and we were granted a temporary occupancy permit. When I brought all the paperwork down to be approved and a license to be issued, we hit a stump. They told us that we had a zoning problem. We've been open for business for almost 3 months, and now we've got an issue. So I'm here asking for an exemption to R1 zoning.
Can you talk about the parking and driveways and that orientation? I think that's the primary concern in these areas is the increased traffic at pickup and drop-off time and things like that. So if you could kind of speak to those issues.
Well, at the present time, we're building a new building next door. We have plenty of parking. We just redid our parking lot. We've got new parking, more parking. We have right now there are 2 coming and going into our parking lot, and the other is blocked off because we're building a building and they've got it blocked off for construction, but we don't have an issue with the traffic.
Board members, any questions?
Now, do you have another building down the street? No, so the church building is where it is, but I saw some construction, so you're expanding it?
Right. We're building a ministry center, yes.
Okay. And then you have a separate area for the children and the parking, and how is that handled?
The children are in our educational area, which are Sunday school had been Sunday school, well, they still are Sunday school rooms, and it's just we don't have a parking problem or a traffic problem. The children don't all come at the same time. They don't all leave at the same time. So it's just steady, but not a problem, or we haven't had a problem.
That is my only question or concern, is because its access is off of Pennsylvania, is that correct? Mm-hmm. That you're not going to have access off any other street?
When the building is finished, we have access to 82nd Street, and there's a light there, traffic light. And we have had a Children's Day Out program for 50 years, and with as many as 75 children, and we've never had a traffic issue, a parking or traffic problem.
Was the church here first, or and the houses were built around the church afterwards, or?
I'm old, but I'm not that old. I don't know.
Old houses.
The church was built, I think, in 62 or 63, and those houses are probably built in the late 60s, maybe. So I would think the church was probably, you live in that area, you should know.
I had a house over there that was built in 62 also. So.
Oh, okay. Well, then, was it the chicken or the egg? I don't know.
Doesn't really matter. I'm just curious.
I think if there were some parking and traffic concerns, the notice that went out to these neighbors, I think would be sufficient to put them on notice, and we'd probably have some objections. So I think I tend to agree with you that you probably don't have any parking or traffic problems. Is anyone else here to speak on this matter? Board members, do you have a motion or any further questions?
I move the approval of the application for the special exception. The reasons, as noted by staff, that it meets all the applicable ordinance requirements for the grant of a special exception. I've been on site, and I think it's very well maintained, and I think it will be accessible, and I think it's large enough, and I don't think the parking will be an issue, and I think it will be a good location.
Thank you.
And you've had the past experience of the daycare.
Yeah,
So I'll
thank you.
move for that.
I'll second.
A motion and a second to approve case number 14643 for the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for a special exception. Record your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item number 4, case number 14646, request for a variance to the front and corner side yard setback in the I-2 Moderate Industrial District located at 620 Southeast 29th Street and 301 South Lindsay Avenue.
Russell Wantland with Resolution Legal Group here on behalf of the applicant. We are requesting a variance to a setback. There's two buildings here. We've provided in our materials an aerial photo showing where on 29th there is a building that's within the 25-foot setback, and then on Lindsay there are some storage tanks. And we've set forth the statutory standards attachment. I'd be glad to answer any questions. Really, the sole purpose of this, there's nothing being changed or done to the property. When real estate transactions start to occur and a survey is done and it identifies a setback, then sometimes for the title company or the buyer, we just need to clean these things up so that there's no issues in allowing the property to change hands or be financed, and that's the reason for this request. I'd be glad to answer any questions about any other particulars.
Sort of my question is the motivation behind the application. I assumed that was the case, but...
Title, yeah.
Board members, any questions?
I think you've stated in your staff report why that it's you're not impossible. You need to discuss the impossibilities of the relocating and the peculiar nature of it and historic nature of the particular location. In support, if you could address that a little bit more.
Sure. On the impossibility, we've got a building that's been there as long as we can identify, and far before the current owner purchased the building. And the current property is fully utilized, and so there is adequate parking there now. But if there, first of all, tearing down the existing structure is I do not think warranted, in lieu of the variance, but also trying to find a place to relocate it on the property would cause the need for other variances, such as parking and other issues. On Lindsay, the storage tanks, I think technically under the code, it's an improvement that requires a setback, but it's not a building, and so I think it's one of those where we need to clean it up, but it's not as impeding as a building is. It's also across the street from industrial zoning, and so I think it's low impact in the current location as well.
I think the only thing I would want is to make sure, and it's implicit in our approval, but that it's, as it's currently configured, it doesn't kind of carry so that someone can maybe build a building where those storage tanks are or something like that.
Correct. It would run with the existing structures or with the replacement of them, but not any additional structures or modifications.
Was anyone else here to speak on this matter? Board members, any further comments or a motion?
I will move to approve case number 14646 for the reasons that it meets the statutory requirements for a variance.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve case number 14646 for the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for a variance. Cast your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Thank you.
Item number 5, Case number 14647, request for a variance to the platted 15-foot front and rear, let me say it again, 15-foot front and rear yard setback and minimum 6-foot separation between an accessory structure and the main structure in the PUD 1418 district located at 13321 Greenscape Road.
So if you could just state your name and your address and give us an overview of your application.
My name is Robert Lewis. This is my wife, Heather Lewis. And as he said, we live at 13321 Greenscape Road. And what we're asking for is to be able to put a pool on the side of our house. Sorry. Because between on our back line, we have a 10-foot utility easement and then another 5-foot building line on top of that. And so that leaves roughly 8 foot between where the building line is to our house. So there's no room to put it there. And on the side, around the side, the 15-foot building line, that comes up into our side yard where if we was going to put a pool in, the only thing we could probably put in is a 15-foot by, be 2 foot on one end and 12 foot on the other end, and it just doesn't make any sense. Everything will be behind fence, and I still think we'd be within, what everybody intended, that you're not going to see it, and it'll be professionally done. We're just not allowed to have above-ground pools there, so we're asking for this variance to be able to do this.
I think one thing that militates in your favor, particularly the 6-foot variance that you're looking for, the pool's considered a structure, and that variance, or I'm sorry, that setback is for the spread of fires. I think it's noted in the staff report, but we're not going to have to worry about that with a pool. But
correct.
Some of the other ones, is a pretty large variance that you're requesting. One of the elements you have to establish is that there's a hardship. Whether you get a pool or not, typically we see a little bit more persuasive hardships. And I'm only one member of the board, but board members, I don't know if you had any questions for the applicant, but.
I was looking at the size. Could you change the size of your pool? It's a rather large pool in the area. And I agree if it could be changed in size, would it become a problem with respect to the utility easement in the back? Maybe have staff comment on that too.
Well, as far as how we have it right now is a 17-foot wide by 35 foot long, and that's being able to butt that right up against the utilities and staying out of the utility easement. And that way, if you push it any further north or east, then we're up by the side of our house. As you can see in the picture, the corner, if you push it any further, what I'm calling east, then we're outside of our fencing and everything. How that's designed there is we'd be 3 foot off the property line on that corner over there, and on the west end, it'd be roughly 15 foot off the property. I mean, so we're getting, it's just that corner, that curve is what causes this. And I mean, what size would be appropriate to you? I mean, we're asking, like I said, we're asking for a 3 foot around the side and then eliminating the 5 foot on the rear so we can put that up against the utilities.
I think where Ms. Lewis is going is generally, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but generally, we want to make sure that whatever we grant, and it's actually an element that's required by the statute, but whatever you're requesting is the least amount of a variance that you could possibly request from us. And so if there's a chance that you can make it smaller, that would militate in favor of a greater chance of us granting your request. But if you can't, it's a very excessive request that you have.
How about could we go to a 5 foot instead of 3 foot?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm one board member, but that's, I think what we're looking at is maybe if you can get it a little bit less of a variance.
I mean, we're to invest that much money into. I mean, we're talking $55,000, and I don't want to invest it into, a little pie-shaped pool. It's impossible because most pool builders, they have a base limit of what they're going to build a pool for, and we've asked for our HOA to be allowed to put an above-ground pool. Well, that's been denied, and this is our last course. I mean, there's really no way to, the only way I can see is if you want to, if you want to come down where it gets wider at the end, I understand that, but at that east end, there's just no way. I mean, to get anything, sizable. I mean, we could do 15 foot wide, and then, like I said, that would give us a 5 foot around the end instead of the 15 foot. And like I said, everything will still be behind the fence. We're allowed to put our fence to 1 foot behind the sidewalk as it is anyway. Nothing will be seen.
Board members, any questions? Does anyone sign up to speak on this matter? I saw you stand up, sir. Okay, we'll go ahead and hear from this gentleman.
Hi, my name is Kelly Parker. I'm the developer for Village Verde Development and also the HOA president. At this time, we're the developer, so we're still under the developer's HOA. We do not oppose what's being proposed as long as it stays out of the back easement. We too would like to see not a 3 foot but a 5 foot away from the fence. That is our only comment, is we support what they're proposing as long as they're out of the easement, out of the back easement, but we would suggest a 5 foot easement and 5 foot between the fence or the property line and the pool. So that's our only comment. We don't have any other objections to the pool or the placement of the pool or anything else.
Thank you. Just to kind of get my thoughts out there, I mean, some of these unique properties, maybe it's just the case that you don't get what you want. I mean, and I know we like to work with you if we can, and maybe we can defer to city staff and see what the minimum that we could allow is that would still work with this. I mean, I don't.
Well, for the utility easement, he's not going to be able to put it in the utility easement, so there's no way it's going in there. It sounds like everybody's talking more about the 3 foot rather than the 5 foot on the west end, and that's just whatever you guys determine. That's how we'll write it up in the board order.
I would like to maybe have the applicant get an opportunity to maybe continue this matter to think it over to see if maybe they would want to do some adjustments and look at that issue.
I think I would support that because as currently submitted, I can't support it. If you limited it.
Well, what's the limit you would want me to? That's, I guess, what we're trying to figure out. What's the happy medium here?
I can't tell you how to get your application approved, or advocate on your behalf. I can just tell you as it's drafted, I personally can't support it, but I'm also only one member of the board. If you came and made the variance such that it was less that we had to grant, I think I'd be more inclined to have an approval here, but as I currently said, I can't really support this. But again, I'm only one member, so I've been outvoted before, so.
I second what the chairman said. I would like to see if you can come up with something.
Can I request to modify it to the 5 foot instead of the 3 foot?
You certainly can. I don't know if that's convincing to the board, if that's enough of a concession for the board, but. I mean, kind of where I currently am, I don't think that the ability to have a pool is a hardship. And so you have to overcome that. And in order to overcome that, you've got to make it a really easy decision for us. And this is just a pretty extreme variance. So that's kind of where I currently am. But I also can't make a motion. So
That's kind of where I'm at too. And it just seemed awful excessive to me. And the size of the yard, I don't know. know. 3 foot is not a lot of space.
Well, can we do, if we did a 15-foot wide pool, can we do, just split the difference and do 7, since we already have a 15?
I think we need to be clear on exactly the variance we'd be granting. And so I don't know if, off the top of my head, I don't know what that would be on all sides. And so for the purposes of the board order, we need to be clear on what the exact variance is.
Well, it'd be 7 around the side, and then still the rear one, we're asking to eliminate that one, so we won't have to push it up past the front of our house, is what we're asking for. That's why
I would rather them come back at a different date, a continued date, to make sure that they've reviewed what they're proposing as an amendment, and give us a little more specific information about that, how they would do that. So I would, but you have to be the one to be asking for a continuance. So, but I recommend you do that, and then come back with what you are able to do for us to consider.
Well, okay, well, I just don't know what you're going to consider to give me. I'll give you the 7 foot. I mean, we're splitting it. If I come back and say, okay, this is 7 foot, and then you're still thinking that's too much. I feel like we should at least get a use of our yard, and that's what I feel like right now with this building line. I don't get the use of my yard. It is a hardship on our yard to not be able to use that. I mean, we pay for that property. I pay the property taxes. I have one of the most beautiful houses as far as landscape-wise in that neighborhood. I will do nothing to take away from that.
Board members, I can't make a motion, so.
I'm not going to, just like I said, I will ask for the 7 foot here, and I'm still asking for the elimination of the rear, and we'll take a vote on it.
So I suppose the request is a 7 foot setback instead of the 3 foot, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. On the side yard, and then still eliminating the rear yard setback is the request.
Correct. And
5
the 4 foot.
5 foot on the rear.
Correct, and the 4
10
foot.
foot utility easement still in place.
Yes. Yes, we will not be in the utilities. We'll still be 10 foot off the back of the fence.
Is that an electric easement, John?
It's a sewage, and I think there is electric and gas that run through there.
All right.
Got an 8-inch sewer line in the back of the easement.
Board members?
I think I could support the 7 feet, but like you, I'm not sure exactly how that's going to play out here. I don't know. That's better than 3 foot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that it's a pool and not a structure, as I started my comments, militates in your favor. We don't have to worry about the spread of fires or an obstruction from the neighbors or something like that. But sounds like you've got one vote, but other board members?
I can support it as amended with the 7 rate, and as the amendment has been presented, and I believe with the HOA comments that would be in line with the recommendations, if possible, for the approval. So I support, I will move to amend case number 14647 is amended by the applicant at the meeting with a 7 foot change, setback change, for the reason all the requisites, statutory requisites have been met.
Second. Got a motion and a second to approve case number 14647 for the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for a variance, subject to amending the application to provide for a 7-foot, or to require a 7-foot setback on the side yard. And I assume the condition also that it's not an above-ground pool. I mean, and a second for that. So please cast your votes. And the application is approved.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, do I have to pick up that to show where our building lines are right now, or are we just good to go?
I'll talk to you. I'll give you a call tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Item number 6, case number 14648, request for a variance to the maximum 4-foot in height for a front yard fence at the DTD1 Downtown Transitional Limited District located at 1111 North Dewey Avenue.
Hi, I'm Amanda LaBrosse for behalf of Miller Architects on behalf of SSM Health. We are doing a renovation to the Bone and Joint Hospital and to add more operating rooms, and so we need additional generators for the emergency electrical, and the only spot we have to put that generator enclosure is where a former canopy used to be. And so on the north side of the building, we're proposing putting a generator screen around the new generators, and the height of the generator is 9 foot 10 inches, so we're proposing a 10-foot generator enclosure to fully screen it.
Seems like a pretty straightforward application. Board members, any questions?
You've had a previous approval for recommendation by the Downtown Design Correct on July 25th. This kind of issue has come before us on several occasions, typically dealing with a medical type facility where you have your fencing requirement that is too low, and you have a generator requirement that requires it be entirely covered. I don't know that you fully addressed that, but is that correct?
Yes, no, it's covered with a metal panel.
So, and then you were trying to put it on the roof or some area?
Initially, it was to go on the roof, but due to the size constraints and the weight constraints, it was not able to.
And are you asking for an extra pad? You're going to put an extra pad so you could do another generator, is that correct?
Yes, there is a potential for a future generator.
I can support this.
I can also support this case.
Yeah. Sounds like a motion somewhere.
I'll make a motion to approve case number 14648 for the reasons that it meets the statutory requirements for a variance.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to approve case number 14648 for the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for a variance. Cast your votes, please. And the variance is approved.
Thank you.
Item number 7, case number 14649, request for a variance to the maximum number of freestanding signs in the C3 Community Commercial District located at 6205 North Santa Fe Avenue.
Hi, my name is Jim Gleason, G&S Sign Services, also representing SSM Health. Through all the locations we've been visiting over the last few months, this is the next on our list. What we're doing here is we've taken the number of signs. There was several directional signs within the campus. To fit within code, we reduced a lot of those signs, the sizes, down to 4 square foot and under. When we came to the streets along Santa Fe, or the signs along Santa Fe, we felt that there was one more that was needed. To the South Drive, there's an urgent care, and we felt we needed better direction to the urgent care on the south side, just because of the 2 buildings, 2 different addresses, several entrances, several doctors' offices. We wanted to get people to that entrance a little safer. So we're applying and asking for consideration for a variance.
Mr. Gleason, I was going to offer you some office space in the buildings. You're here so often. Board members, do you have any questions of the applicant? Seems similar to some other applications we've seen for SSM, and I think this does meet the conditions for a variance.
Yeah, I have no questions, but I've gone there to the hospital, and it is difficult to find the offices. So I truly understand why you're needing this variance. And I make a motion to approve case number 14649 for the reasons that it meets the statutory requirements for a variance.
I second it.
Got a motion and a second to approve case number 14649 for the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for a variance. Cast your votes, please. And the application's approved.
Thank you.
Item number 8, case number 14623, application for a special exception to allow lodging accommodations home sharing in the R1 Single Family Residential District located at 4813 North Miller Avenue.
Is the applicant present? I think on, in consideration or as a bit of a consideration for the applicant, I think we should continue the application for one meeting. Is there anyone here that was, it looks like I had a couple of people signed up to be heard on this matter. Unfortunately, it looks like it'll be continued for one meeting. When's the next meeting? September 5th?
What was it continued for the last time? What, did they not show up, or
no, they were.
We needed to send a notice again, I think.
No, on this one, there was a chance that she could have been grandfathered in.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so we gave her some time to see if they could see if that was possible. But yeah, that's true. That's a good idea. We'll wait and put this one to the end of the docket and see if the applicant shows up. And we don't need a motion for that, right? Okay. So we'll move on.
Okay. Item number 9, case number 14629, application for a special exception to allow lodging accommodations home sharing in the R2 medium-low residential district located at 1106 Northwest 27th Street, Apartment C.
Scott Henderson on behalf of Primary Investments for the home sharing at 1106 Unit C off Northwest 27th.
I think unless any board members have any specific questions, you were here before. Would you agree to just incorporate your comments and that presentation today?
That's fine.
Okay. Board members, did you have any questions for the applicant?
No, I think it was adequately covered at your meeting, and you fully disclosed everything and satisfied you meet the requisites. I think we were making sure we had the right address in the publication. So you're here as a result of the publication change with the address. So I have no questions. I support this.
Is anyone here to speak on this matter other than the applicant? Okay. Board members, any questions or a motion?
No questions. Like everyone stated, he was here last time, so I make a motion to approve case number 14629 for the reason that it meets the statutory requirements for the requirements for a special exception.
On the other applications, we granted the application for a period of 5 years. Would you want to be consistent with that?
Yes, for a period of 5 years.
You can go 10, Mr. Merchant.
So this one unit gets 10 and the other gets 5?
No one's got 10 yet, so.
That's okay.
Second.
Thank you.
Got a motion and a second to approve case number 14629 for the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for a special exception limited to a period of 5 years. Cast your votes, please. And the special exception is granted.
Item number 10, case number 14638, application for a special exception to allow lodging accommodations, home sharing in the SPUD 942 district located at 1620 North Blackwelder Avenue. Should I read all of these at one time? Okay, let's go with that.
Oh, my name is Jeff Struble, 1916 Northwest 18th Street. Here to get your approval on our lodging on 4 Airbnbs.
If you could just go over this project and...
Yes, we started it last year, so I guess this came up after we'd already started the project. But basically we have 4 Airbnbs. We have 2 one-bedrooms in the back, and then we have a 2-bedroom downstairs up front, and then we have a 3-bedroom upstairs in the Plaza Overlay Thriving Arts District. So I think it makes a good fit for all the restaurants and bars around there to give people some other options for lodging.
in discussions with city staff, it came to our attention that this was a bit more unusual case, and I'm sure that's not news to you, but I don't know that the Board of Adjustment is the appropriate board for this, and this is not anything to say about the merits of your application or the project. I frankly like the project and love the area, and I think Airbnbs fit in great there, especially in this particular location. But I know one thing that we're leery about is the presidential effect of each particular case that comes in front of us. And in this case, we would be granting 4 variances, and I think, or 4 special exceptions. Are there 4 units in this building total?
Correct.
Yeah, and that feels to me like we'd be rezoning this as like a hotel or, something like that. And so I'd feel more comfortable if this went for planning. It was approved by planning and city council. I think it's just a bit beyond our authority, not particularly for your application, but I'm worried that if we grant this, we grant anyone that wants to turn their entire building into a home sharing operation. So.
Well, when I pulled the application last year before this came into play, that was fine, and then now I've spent $300 per unit on this to come here in front of you, and I think that's a little much to be asking at this point. And it takes over 5 units to be classified as a boutique hotel, so that's why we made this was a duplex. We went into 4 last year because of that reason, so we were in compliance with everything but the city. Then this came in this year, so I think that in itself is kind of, a burden on us and the money we've put into the building and the process we went through so far.
I understand. It's certainly frustrating, and I know that this change happened kind of right in the middle of your development of this project. It just doesn't change our power and what the city council delegated or relegated to us. And again, I feel like even in this admittedly unique circumstance, if we approved it, anyone with a similar project would have to say, you've approved this exact same thing in the past. I should also add, you'll be able to roll those application fees over to your planning application, so you won't have to repay twice or anything like that. And if planning wants to kick it to us and thinks that we're the appropriate venue, we'll take that in consideration. That said, I'm also only one member of the board. I know we have a member of planning here, so I think you'll probably have to see him again anyway, but if any other board members have comments, those are my comments.
I would ask that the municipal counselor's office just comment or address the issue of the application.
So the base zoning of this SPUD is neighborhood business, which allows for home sharing as a conditional use with the conditions that the applicant get the license and a special exception if it is not their primary residence. And is not listed among the permitted uses specifically in the SPUD because this was not in existence at the time that the SPUD was negotiated.
So what you're saying is we need to go do a SPUD, a rezoning of this that would take 3 or 4 months to do after I've been postponed 2 weeks ago because the mailing didn't go out. I mean, this I think is kind of extreme for what we're talking about here.
I understand. I don't feel good about it. Like I said, I like the project, but I just recognize the limited powers that the board has and like to respect those personally, but I'm only one member on the board. If the other board feels comfortable with granting it, you only need 3 votes.
So where's the threshold here? Is that 2 or 3 Airbnbs in 4? Because like the city considers 5 a boutique hotel, so we're within those guidelines. So that's where I'm kind of confused and kind of so.
It's more to do with it being an SPUD than just being 4 B&Bs.
Okay.
I will definitely feel more comfortable if you choose to continue, maybe go to Planning Commission, because I do feel that might be something that they need to see. And if they decide that it's up to us to make that decision, then I'll feel comfortable making that decision at that point.
So would that be on the next agenda, or are we having to wait? What are we looking at on this?
If we continue this application and take your $1,200 that you spent for the 4 cases, we can apply that to the $1,800 for the SPUD, but it's got to start. It'll be a 3-month process at least. to go through Planning Commission and City Council.
Okay. So I think that in itself is a big burden. I mean, we've put a lot of money in this now. We've waited a couple months already. Now we're going another 4 months possibly. I just think that's in itself is pretty, I mean, we're not in a residential area, we're in a business district. I mean, this is accepted in the area.
I understand.
Right.
You may watch and participate in the Board of Adjustment meetings week after week. I assume that you don't watch every Board of Adjustment meeting, but we see these home sharing applications all the time. They are hotly disputed every time, virtually every time. And so we're very careful with the decisions that we grant in these areas, just because it's not, it's a very new space, and we see these disputed applications all the time. So that's why I'm hesitant to support the application.
Well, is there anybody against the application?
I would deny the application personally.
Well, I mean, any of the neighbors. I mean, everybody's in favor that I've talked to about it. And
I understand.
And I can see if it was in a neighborhood situation, but we're in a business overlay. So it's different than being in a neighborhood. Does anybody else have any comments on it? Because I really hate to take 4 more months out of my pocket.
Well, I thought the guidance from the municipal counselor's office would indicate we would want to do it that way. I should think that is correct.
That's my, well,
I just wanted
I don't want to put words in her mouth, but.
Right. So, and the board can consider each of these applications separately also, not necessarily as a bundle. I mean, just because he's presented applications for 4 separate units, it would be within the board's discretion if they wanted to grant some, if not all.
And the parking spaces, it says 2. Is that 2 per unit? 2 spaces? Or
there's 4 spaces in the building. Okay. There's 4 separate rentable spaces, yes.
For parking spaces, I mean.
Yeah, there's 4 designated spaces, but I have 100 parking spaces right next to it. So there's plenty of parking. We have restaurants right next to it, or right on the same block, but there is 4 designated spaces for this unit, definitely, yes.
If it provides you some relief, I know it's not what you wanted, but I was prepared to grant one of these, but just not all 4, maybe 2 of them. So, that might be something that you could generate some income from these things while that planning commission process is going. Maybe you could pick whichever one you think would be, the best unit or something, and we could look at approving that on its own merits.
Mm-hmm. So how does that work with my $1,200 that we've put? Like you said, we have $1,800 for a variance, so I still have that to move forward, or they just have, how does that work?
If we approved one?
Yeah,
presumably, $300 would be deducted from the total amount that would be credited.
Okay.
But you'd have the income coming in from that one, or 2. The board might approve 2 units. I don't know. I know there's one board member that's absent that would have some serious reservations about this as well.
Well, if we can approve 1, I don't know why we couldn't approve 2, and that still wouldn't set in motion the issue that you're raising.
It allows him to get some income from these units while he's going through the rezoning process.
And we do have 4 separate applications. I mean, we had to do 4 applications, so, okay.
Are there 2 in particular that you?
Yeah, probably 1 and 2.
Okay.
Front 2 would be.
Board members, any comments or objections?
I feel good about granting 2 of them instead of 4, for sure. And like I said, I'll probably see you at Planning Commission.
Yes. So let me get this right. So when I did this application, at that point, which I know this is new, then that should have thrown us into a SPUD. Or is that what you're saying, Council?
I'm not sure that that's true. I think that city staff probably wasn't entirely, just because it is new, they didn't know how the board was going to rule on it, and so this would be the easier and quicker route to see what the board does. And now we know what the board's going to do. I don't want to, okay, yeah. So,
okay.
Do we have any motions for this particular case number, which 14638 is unit number 1, and the next case is unit number 2?
Item number 11, case number 14639, to allow the lodging accommodations home sharing, SPUD 942, 1620 North Blackwell, Unit 2. I just wanted to read that into the record, so for both of them.
Was anyone here to speak other than the applicant on case number 10 or 11? Board members, do we have any motions?
I'll make the motion. approve the special exception for, you just read them, 14638 and 14639. Period of 5 years. Reasons that it meets, reasons for a special exception.
Second it.
Got a motion and a second to approve case number 14638 and 14639 for the reasons that these applications meet the statutory requirements for special exceptions. Cast your votes, please. And the two applications are approved.
John, what is the deadline for the next submittal? And this will be a SPUD? Is that, or what are we?
Yes, it would probably be a SPUD, and I don't have that.
Okay. Well, okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Are we going to continue these?
So let's continue the other two until, okay. All right.
Do we want to just continue them indefinitely to be reset by contacting city staff, or? Okay. So maybe 2 months. Yeah, 2 months.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. We need a motion to continue, right?
So it'd be a motion to continue the meetings to or the applications to October 17th. October 17th. If we have a motion and a second for those.
Motion.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to continue case number 14640 and 14641 to the October 17th meeting of the Board of Adjustment. Cast your votes, please. And those are approved.
Okay, thanks.
Item number 14, case number 14624, application for a special exception to allow lodging accommodations home sharing in the HP Historic Preservation District located at 1429 Northwest 38th Street.
Blake Gatewood at 1429 Northwest 38th Street. I am the owner of the home where I live with my wife and my twin boys who are 10 months old. We are applying to home share a small portion of our home.
Mr. Gatewood, I will interject here because it might save you some time. No, that's fine, perfectly fine, but just might save you some time. This is coming to us from review by the Historic Preservation Commission, where they've recommended approval. This was disputed there. You presented this application before that board. The objections were noted into the record. Would you have any objection to just introducing those comments in your presentation and also the objections? Okay. In light of that, I think an overview of your application is appropriate, but maybe not the entire presentation. Okay.
Do you want to maybe specific questions or?
Yeah, I think just a general overview, if you can go through it in a couple of minutes, and then any new information that was not presented, because we've all reviewed that proceeding, so we don't need to go through that again. So,
okay. So my house is up on the screen. It was originally built as a duplex, later turned into a single-family home. What me and my wife are proposing is that we use this door, it's the red door on the left, if you can tell, as kind of a home sharing opportunity. Now, I want to emphasize kind of the scale of what we're doing. It's a single bedroom, and you walk in, there's a small living room, and then you walk through the small living room and there's a small bedroom. There's a bathroom attached to that small bedroom, and that will kind of be it. We're thinking about putting in a little kind of coffee bar, kitchenette in the living room as well, but it'll kind of be a bed where one or two people can sleep. So I think that really takes care of or addresses a lot of the concerns that you might hear or might have read about. Just there'll be one or maybe two people staying there. I know a lot of people who use Airbnb come in on Uber, or maybe we'll have one or two cars on the public street. But that's kind of it. So that's our plan. And as far as that goes, that's kind of all I have as far as explaining what we're doing.
So is it one room and then kind of the entryway. Is that accurate to say? Is there one bed as well?
There's one bed, yeah. So you walk in, and there's a living room, and the living room's kind of opened up to the bedroom that's in the back, too. So you can see the back wall of the bedroom.
For the purposes of the record.
Sorry. You can see the back wall of the bedroom from where you walk into the left door. And so we're going to put a queen or a king bed there where one or two people can sleep.
Is it advertised currently?
No.
Okay.
No. We have not been using it as an Airbnb yet.
Are you going to advertise it as one room for 1 to 2 people? Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay. Board members, any questions?
I kind of pulled up, I listened to the Historical Preservation hearing, and then attached to that was the application. And you indicated it was more or less a mother-in-law suite. Is that correct?
Yeah, so when I actually purchased the home, that's how it was listed in the home listing. So that's kind of, I don't know if that's a thing or not, but it was called a mother-in-law suite when I bought it.
So you indicated that it would have its own bathroom, laundry room, bedroom, and living room, and then you had one bedroom. Is that correct? Or how many there'd be one bedroom in that area, right?
One bedroom in that kind of segmented off portion of the house. And there is a space for laundry. There's connects. We just haven't bought. I don't know if we're going to buy laundry.
So you would have the one bedroom with those areas that are next to it. Is that correct? Or you anticipate?
Yeah, there's 2 rooms, a living room and a bedroom, only one bedroom.
Right. And so really you're only going to have maybe a couple or a family member and child or some other thing like that.
Something like that. That's what we anticipate, and that's what we'll put on our listing as well. I wouldn't be opposed to having a couple and their child come in, but that's kind of the most it would be, I think.
Okay. So the way I was reading on the general purpose in the application, it kind of narrowed it to that, although there would be like a living room near there, but it wouldn't be a living area.
Yeah, there wouldn't be a pull-out bed or anything like that? Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, we don't plan to put in a pull-out bed.
Okay. Board members, any questions?
You mentioned that that's how the house was advertised when you purchased it. So have you made any more modifications to the structure itself, used to even separate it more, or it was already like the way that you're using it? There's connections still to the main area, is my guess.
Yeah, good question. So to be clear, it was not advertised as an Airbnb, but it was advertised as a mother-in-law suite. So there are 2 doorways that go into this segmented off portion of the house right now. We plan to drywall one of those doorways in and put double doors on the other doorway so that when my wife's family comes in town or whatever, we can, it could still be part of the house, but then when we have guests using it for home sharing, we can kind of segment it away from the house, the main part of the house. But that's the extent of what construction would be, is closing in drywall on one doorway.
Got a few people signed up to speak, so we'll call you back up.
Okay,
after those.
thank you.
Sure. First, Mr. Daniel, speaking in favor. And I will say, for the people that have signed up, we've incorporated the proceedings from Historic Preservation Commission, and so we'd ask that you not repeat those comments because those are already in the record. If you have anything new to say, certainly add that, and also maybe give an overview of your comments at HP, but we don't need to kind of recite everything that went on HP.
Sure.
And I'll also add, there were some disputes back and forth, people discriminating against other people, things like that. I don't think that's what the neighbors are doing. I don't think the applicants are doing anything underhanded.
that was actually that's not accurate. No one has accused them.
Hold on. This isn't for you. This is for everyone out there. I certainly reject any kind of insinuation like that, and we just don't need comments like that at this hearing.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that, and appreciate you saying that, because that certainly was never communicated or intended. So my name is Josiah Daniel. I live at 1609 Northwest 38th Street, a block to the west from the subject property. And the reason I feel it's important to speak today is that the issue before you is whether the existence of a single-bedroom Airbnb unit located in a structure that was purpose-built for multifamily housing. We look at it checks all the boxes in the ordinance. Now, what we have, unfortunately, what's come out of this is a lot of other issues, and I think that's really what you're speaking to. And I know that you are used to dealing with a lot of emotions and issues surrounding home sharing, but it's important to note that a few blocks from this property, there is a grandfathered Airbnb unit that's been operating for quite some time. And none of the neighbors here today opposing this application are apparently aware of this. And the reason for that is because that Airbnb unit hasn't caused any crime or parking or traffic or noise issues. That's why they don't know about its existence. And that's exactly what would likely happen here. Now, there's a couple of other things that I think it's really important for the members of the board to understand. And that is that some of the neighbors here have orchestrated legal battles against previous owners of this home that resulted in it being vacant from the year 2012 until March 2019. I think that's a really important fact to recognize, because what it tells us is that those lawsuits were not about historic preservation. Opposition to this application is not about whether or not using this mother-in-law suite as an Airbnb unit will impact the historic nature of this neighborhood. We know this because they've had lawsuits about it. They have fought it in other ways. What it's really about is enforcing R1 zoning, no matter what. And I think that, the reason that this gets me so frustrated, and why you even saw it get people frustrated on members of the Historic Preservation Commission, is that single-family and historic preservation zoning laws are inherently exclusionary. And they've shaped the economic segregation we see in Oklahoma City and other areas. And so when I see in my own backyard people trying to implement things and to reinforce zoning laws that have led to the way this city is designed today, the segregated nature in which this city is designed today, I'm just not going to sit down and say nothing about that. It's not comfortable to say. I know my neighbors bristle and they don't like it when we talk about these things, but this is the fact. These are the facts. And I really urge you, the last thing I'll note is I just really urge you that if we look at this as an exercise of applying the facts of the case to the requirements in the ordinance, it's quite clear that this is really straightforward. But when we start folding in all of these societal fears around irrationality around this being increasing crime or traffic or anything like that, we really start to obfuscate what's really going on. And so I just urge you to really keep those two things in mind. Thank you very much.
Ms. Bates, Candace Bates.
Hello, Candace Bates, 1516 Northwest 36th Street. I don't really have a lot more to say than has been said before at HP. I just support the project, and I think I travel a lot on Airbnb. We do so for business and for traveling with our family. It's just more conducive for traveling with a small child. And I think, I believe that the nature of it and the nature of the reviews and him having positive reviews and a positive relationship within our immediate neighborhood is only going to benefit him renting it out, and potentially, the curbside appeal of a house in our neighborhood. That's it. So, thank you.
Board members, any questions for the previous speakers before we move on?
I know Candace, on her letter, said that you live next door to the house that is being rented as an Airbnb currently, right? Could you talk about You know, I think you stated on the letter your experience being next door to an Airbnb in your neighborhood.
Yeah, so I live probably the closest to the current one. How the garage, it's in their garage apartment and it backs up right directly. And so for the most part, I never really know that anyone's there. I never hear anyone. I might hear like someone having a conversation in the backyard, but I've never really had any issues. I have looked on the website, and I've seen, you know, as of last week, they've had 86 positive reviews. So in 8 months, they have, you know, 10 guests a month at least, if everyone's reviewing. And I do know that she has I think she has some additional rules about, you know, being aware of you're in a neighborhood, you need to be quiet after hours. So I'm most of the time unaware of them being there.
Thank you.
Miles Mixon.
Hi, Miles Mixon, 515 Northwest 42nd. I would just like to support this. I don't see any problem with it. I've stayed in Airbnbs throughout the country. I actually, you know, currently right now I have some neighbors that continually have guests with them. They don't really have an Airbnb, but, you know, it's actually been nice to just kind of chat with people as they, you know, come and stay with them. I just, you know, I don't really have a problem. I think if we're having a hotel, you know, just across the way, I don't see what the problem is just having someone who wants to basically, you know, invite guests from time to time in his home. I don't see it being a parking problem or anything like that. I live on a street that's narrow as well, and, you know, occasionally, I mean, every day I drive down the street, if anything's going to be a problem for parking, it's going to be general contractors and guys with lawn trucks everywhere. So other than that, I just, you know, generally like to support this. Thank you.
And I think the remainder of the folks here to speak are all in protest. If you would like for someone to speak on your behalf, feel free. If everyone has something unique to say, feel free to speak. Shannon O'Sullivan, and I won't even try to do the last name. Mesnier.
I was not at the previous hearing, and I am aware of the grandfathered Airbnb that's in our neighborhood. What's significant about that is it is in a separate structure. It's a garage apartment. I think it's great if someone has a garage apartment or a cottage in their backyard, if they want to use it to rent it to a student or a long-term renter or use it as an Airbnb, that's one thing. But I just prepared a statement, and I'm just going to go ahead and read it because this is not my venue of comfort. As you stated, my name, I reside at 1414 Northwest 38th Street, which is 2 houses east. If you look at this picture, I'm across the street at the entrance of Putnam Heights. I've worked as a nurse for the last 20 years. I purchased my home on 38th Street in 2012 as a single parent of 2 young children. The home is my single biggest investment. Part of the reason I chose the neighborhood was, first, it was a sound financial investment. I saw the restoration that was going on in Midtown and downtown Oklahoma City, and I believed that this real estate was a sound investment. And I also wanted my children to live in an area where they would be exposed to diversity. One of the biggest factors in purchasing my home was the reassurance of the person that I bought it from, the seller, Brad Irving, that the neighborhood had finally settled a lengthy dispute to enforce that Putnam Heights would be solely comprised of single-family homes. Like most of my neighbors, I have my own financial story and challenges to make ends meet. I can only speak to my own. My home is also structured as a duplex, like most of the homes, a lot of the homes, I don't know the number, in Putnam Heights. My upstairs is a complete carbon copy of my downstairs. I have 2 fully functioning kitchens, just so everyone's aware. But it is a single-family home. That's the ruling that was made several years ago. 3 years ago this August, my former husband and father of my children sadly took his own life. The investment in my home took on a whole new meaning for my children's future. I'm now the sole financial provider to my 2 children. Like many homes in Putnam Heights, like I said, my home was formerly a duplex. My biggest concern about all of this is that this was already zoned as a single-family home neighborhood. And what Mr. Gatewood is proposing is another way to reinstate duplex living. Any assurances by him cannot really be considered in this case because the decision is linked to the property, not its owner. And that is a concern. I'm opposing it because it changes the nature of single-family homes, and I must protect my investment because my 2 children depend on it now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Dane Leibart.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My name is Dane Leibart. I reside at 1426 Northwest 38th Street, which is directly across the street from the Gatewoods. And I will try and be succinct and not repeat stuff that's been said before. There's 2 specific reasons as to why I'm opposed to the exception. And the first reason, if there ever were a basis for an exception, I believe this house qualifies for it based on the history that we've been through. The community came out vocally to maintain the single-family status of that house. I donated money to the legal fund to see that happen because we're concerned about traffic, our narrow streets, and maintaining the unique quality of the historic district. I think, or I believe, that when the city, this is the second reason, when the city council passed the historic preservation ordinance in 1969, their intention was to maintain the exact image of the houses as they were built and not to change them. In addition to that, I think we're missing the forest for the trees here because we live by a different standard than the other folks that do not live in historic districts. We live more like people in a condominium. We are governed by that ordinance. I can't change my windows. I can't do many things that I totally agree to live by because I believe in the value of serving the greater good of the community. Our communities do not look the way they do. It's a beautiful community. It's only 100 homes. So based on the history of this house, where the community spoke loudly and clearly that they did not want it to be a rooming house, that gives us, I believe, a status already that the exception should not be allowed. So I'll just keep it simple.
Thank you. Board members, any questions for the last few speakers? Thank you. Jan Post. Okay. Okay. Ms. Broadbent.
Good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Broadbent. I live at 3625 North McKinley in the Putnam Heights Historic District, and I have lived there for 26 years. I have also served on the board and as president of Putnam Heights Historic Preservation Area for 5 years. I'm not presently president, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the association. My point today is to put this application in perspective. It's very much about historic preservation, despite comments earlier to the contrary. And I was pleased to hear the chair mention the precedential effect of these cases. This is the very first case under the new home share ordinance for historic preservation districts. It's important to Putnam Heights. It's important to all the historic preservation districts. And that's why, one of the reasons we're working so hard on this. A little bit of context about the ordinance. I have served on the Historic Preservation Commission. I just completed a 3-year term. And in addition to my work in Putnam Heights, of course, the commission added another element. And I worked, and I was the only commissioner who did, on the drafting and the not the implementation, that's what we're here about today, on the drafting and the compromises that went into this ordinance. 2 city council members actually participated to a great extent with us in this ordinance. So I say that just to show you how important it was and how much we had to work on the things that we came up with. The Airbnb, and I would remind you, there are other platforms. So with not as many protections as Airbnb, Craigslist, for example. Airbnb would not come to the table with us, but the city staff did an admirable job working with them in a way that resulted in this ordinance. And the important thing about this ordinance for us today is that it contains protections for the historic preservation districts. And that's how it wound up on your agenda. And now it is up to you as the gatekeepers to make that protection meaningful through careful consideration, which you are giving to any request for a special exception. The one thing I would like to just very, very briefly remind us of, if the board doesn't mind, is the importance of historic preservation and what we went through to get where we are. We've been around for 50 years. I have been around for 50 years personally, but historic preservation has been around for 50 years. And it's easy to take for granted these wonderful historic preservation neighborhoods and what they mean to the city and forget how hard it was to get them. And all I want you to take from this document, oh gosh, did I give you my copy? No. The important thing to take from this document is that it was a planning commission document in 1967 when Oklahoma City started looking at historic preservation and recognizing its value. And if I could get your attention to page 3, where incompatible land uses are noted as causing the general deterioration of the neighborhood and the surrounding buildings, and that increasing commercial development and multifamily residential use are great threats. Now, this document is talking about the area that is now Heritage Hills. That was the first area that was considered for historic preservation status, and that was due to a lot of work on the people that lived in that area who moved into a slum. Heritage Hills was a slum. Now, I say that, and I'm not making it up, because on page, well, they're not numbered, but I marked it. Stopping the spread of incompatible land uses was important, and the Planning Commission noted that the area can quickly deteriorate into a slum if those standards are not upheld. So they also noted that the district will not be successful if it is an island surrounded by an ocean of intensive noise and traffic generation land uses. And the plan, combined with the establishment of a historical preservation district, provides the protection necessary. So I bring this to your attention to show that these are issues that were back then, and they are still issues. And historic preservation cannot be taken for granted. So we must be vigilant in our protections, including this one in the home share ordinance. Heritage Hills was the first district, HP district, but Putnam Heights was second in 1972. We've been at this for 47 years. And since that time, we have worked with the city, and the city has invested much money in our historic preservation districts, including Putnam Heights. We've worked together on lighting on our medians. Our neighborhood raises $8,000 to $10,000 on top of our neighborhood dues to take care of the medians. So we're not just people who sit back and yell, "Not in my backyard," which is not what we're doing right now anyway. But we really do work on these neighborhoods. The houses in Putnam Heights, I wish you had had time to drive through Putnam Heights to get the full sense of what this neighborhood is like. We are only 104 houses, so we're pretty small, but it's a beautiful tree-lined. We have 4 acres of public space, which I just said we'd take care of. And all the houses are well maintained, and they're all sizes, from 12 to 1,500 feet up to more than 5,000 square feet. Most of them are around 3,000 square feet, which is the size of the applicant's house. They are major contributing properties to the historic assets of this city. One of the major tenets of historic preservation is identifying your major contributing properties and preserving them. And that is what this application threatens, is a major contributing property, this house, that is a beautiful house and is a single-family home and built in 1911, and trying to impact its use to the detriment of the property and the surrounding properties. So the issue for those of us in opposition to this application is the inappropriate use of a major contributing property for commercial purposes. The applicant has said the space is small, only a little piece of the house, et cetera. That's not the issue. The point is it opens up this major contributing property to a use that is not intended, was not, and is not, in my opinion, authorized. We depend on the Board of Adjustment to set these standards, and I believe that that's one of them, because the overarching criteria in taking care of a historic preservation district is exactly that, not letting harm come to the historic preservation, to the historic properties. Oklahoma City has stated its policy long ago that these districts should be protected and continued it in this home share ordinance. I would remind, I wasn't going to say much about this because it's past history, but the lawsuit that has been talked about was actually in defense of the Board of Adjustment's ruling in 2012 that this property could not be made into a multifamily house. That's what we spent money for, was to defend this board's ruling, and we won in district court. So it wasn't a long legal battle. It wasn't a big neighborhood brouhaha. We were pretty much in agreement, all of us, and we spent $10,000 of our own money. So that shows that the Board of Adjustment saw the wisdom there. And I might add that the Historic Preservation Commission in that case did not stand by us either. And the Board of Adjustment, applying its own rules, as it should, said that the Historic Preservation Commission was wrong, and I believe they're wrong in this case. I'll say a bit more about that if the Chair will indulge me just a little bit. So 4 months after moving into this property, the applicant, without much knowledge of historic preservation or the neighborhood experience with these kinds of things, files this application, which essentially is trying to do indirectly what he cannot do directly under the Board of Adjustment's former ruling. So the applicant bought the house subject to historic preservation standards and subject to this new ordinance. It had been passed 3 or 4 months before he bought this house. So the home share, let me go into this. So the home share that is in our neighborhood that has been set up as an example of why home shares aren't a problem, I'm very much aware of it. I live exactly next door to it.
If you have a copy for the applicant as well.
I believe there's an extra copy, yes, because I didn't realize I had a vacancy on the board. So if you look at the first page of this, these two pictures, the first one, that is a picture of the home share, and you will notice that it is a small confined space, it is a carriage house, and it is adorable. And my next door neighbors take very good care of it. They got grandfathered in. I don't know whether there'd have been objection to it if we'd have had a chance or not. I probably wouldn't have, as long as it was confined and these neighbors take care of it. I would have had a few concerns, but I know we're going to have some home shares in historic preservation districts, even though we tried not to, and that's how we came up with this compromise. What we don't want is home shares in the major contributing property. So if you will turn the page, this is the house in front of the Airbnb or home share that I just showed you. Who wants the owner to turn this house into short-term home rentals? It is a beautiful house. It is the star house in Putnam Heights. It's the one everybody wants to buy. The house that is in question here is also a beautiful house. It's not as striking as this one because of lack of landscaping, somewhat lack of maintenance, that sort of thing, but it is still a major contributing property. So if we say yes to opening up this major contributing property, this beautiful house, to some kind of home sharing, which I still contend, even though the applicant says, oh, it'll just be one room, et cetera, there's hardly any way to enforce that, and it quite possibly could result in more problems based on more occupancy. So if we say yes to this home share, how do we say no to this one, if it were to come up? And it might. There can be serious issues with traffic and all, and I don't need to get into that. This case is even bigger than the traffic issues, which are important. But that's why those of us who were aware of Airbnb problems in other cities, also aware of the problems that we've had in historic preservation districts and how hard we've worked, that's why we worked so hard to get these protections in this ordinance. I would point out, even entities as small and cohesive as Nichols Hills and the Village just recently banned home shares because even they couldn't control the problems that come with some home shares. So Putnam Heights is not an outlier in these concerns. They are real and they need to be considered, but particularly for their impact on the major contributing properties. Not just the house in question, but the houses around it. They're all major contributing properties. It takes a neighborhood cohesiveness to protect them. And I'm just about through, if you'll indulge me. So this is the first case to apply, as you know, the new home share ordinance protections under special exception. That was put in as gatekeepers, so you would be gatekeepers and it wouldn't be anything goes. Now, the burden is on the applicant to show why he should get a special exception. That means more than just showing up and saying, I want to do it, and expecting a rubber stamp. Land use law controls, and special exceptions are for the purpose of allowing uses in a reasonable, uniform, controlled manner, but to prohibit them when that is not the case, when the criteria are not met. And the overarching criteria here is protection of these major historic assets. So I want, obviously, I urge this board to set a very high bar on applications for home shares that will impact the major contributing properties, which are usually the single-family homes. And that's what we're dealing with here. The only thing I would like to add about the Historic Preservation Commission and the notes that were sent over. I was not at the meeting, although I was on the Historic Preservation Commission at that time. I've missed about 3 meetings in the last 3 years. We had a family vacation, trying to coordinate schedules, et cetera, out of town, and I was going to miss this meeting. I did participate in writing, you've seen it, I suspect, what I sent to the Historic Preservation Commission. I was absolutely shocked and flabbergasted at the Historic Commission's ruling and some of their comments. Just briefly, one commissioner didn't see the importance of protection for historic preservation districts. She said so. What's the difference in historic preservation and the house across the street? There's a whole lot of difference. I was absolutely flabbergasted. One commissioner...
I think on that, just to interrupt for just a second, I think on that was the constitutional concern.
Well, she didn't raise a constitutional concern. That has been raised at the city council, and the council decided that they felt comfortable. But it was argued, and I agree. Someone could argue it. We may lose this if somebody wants to go to federal court. Another said, not in my backyard. His exact words were, well, I wouldn't want it next door to me, but then he voted for it. I'm flabbergasted. I read the HP Commission's report as more a statement that the outside of the house won't be hurt. That has been stated, that he doesn't intend to do any modifications on the outside of the house. His intended modifications on the inside of the house, which of course are not any of the HP Commission's business, but they might be business of this body, because it's more work toward making this house toward a multifamily house, which is, that battle's been fought, might be fought again, especially if it's modified to the point where somebody said, well, that's what it is. So I obviously, and I'm speaking for quite a few people here, not all of Putnam Heights, not the board, but you see we have several. We have several who've sent letters who can't be here because they work. We would urge you, of course, to deny this application based on mainly its harm to major contributing property and to the other major contributing properties around it. That is a historic preservation tenet that is well established in law and scholarship. This application cannot pass muster. I asked the board to set a very high bar in this kind of case, and this application flies in the face of historic preservation efforts that have been expended for the last 50 years. It sets a precedent for anyone asking to use these beautiful houses for short-term rentals that is very dangerous, and I'm not sure how you can say no if you approve this one. Thank you.
Before you leave, any questions for Ms. Broadbent from the board? I know to summarize your argument, is it accurate to say that your primary objection is that this is a major contributing property and that you might not have the same objections for other homes in the neighborhood that were not major contributing properties? Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, that it would affect other homes in the neighborhood that also are major contributing properties?
My understanding of your argument is that what makes this unique is that it's a major contributing property. And you might
house is, yes.
Right, and you might have different objections or not objections, I don't know, but you might have different feelings if this were not a major contributing property. Is that accurate?
What I would consider not a major contributing property is the garage apartment, a guest house, something like that that's more in the backyard, that is generally, when they come before the commission, we don't generally consider those things that can't be torn down, you know, that kind of thing. Those guest houses, et cetera, are generally not what we worry about in historic preservation.
Okay, but if it's a normal kind of single-family major contributing property and they wanted to rent out one room, you would oppose that on any of the properties?
In a historic preservation district, pretty much every house is a contributing property. The value of it doesn't matter. It's historic. Once they're in a district, they are historic. And I might add, we're on the National Register of Historic Places. All of that takes a lot of work, and we've proved our historic worth. You don't get on that without proving, you know, that these are valuable historic assets for the city.
Okay, I just wanted to understand the scope of your argument.
No, one house is not more important than the other unless it's, you know, not a contributing property. But by definition, it pretty much is.
Okay. Any comments from the board?
Just have a couple questions. The ordinance number 26082 anticipated that there would be home sharing applications approved in all of the historic preservation districts. Is that correct?
That was a compromise,
And it did not provide for any exceptions for garages or different types of standards regarding the type of housing that would be granted the special exception. Is that correct?
It didn't specifically say that. That's true.
Okay. With regards to that, there are standards for the board to review today. And of those standards, other than you mentioned a little bit about traffic, what standard are you pointing to that hasn't been met in the application before us?
The overarching criterion of protecting the historic preservation district. To me, that is understood intrinsic in allowing a process to come before this board where the Board of Adjustment has to decide whether this is an appropriate application. That's all that's what we have. We couldn't, when we were drafting this ordinance, working with the parties, we couldn't think of every specific kind of situation that might arise. And that's why it got dumped in your lap, actually. I mean, we're relying on you as the gatekeepers to fill in the blanks that make this special exception meaningful.
I think just to address the statutory standards and what's been designated to us, you probably don't have those in front of you, so I'm not going to hold you to quoting those. But I think what your argument would be that the application is not in harmony with the policies of the comprehensive plan, and or that it's not in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the applicable zoning district regulations. I think that's probably what you would
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Board members, any questions? Okay. I don't see a slip, but Mr. McCreary, did you? Yeah.
Thank you, board members. My name is David McCrary. I am here. I'm a neighbor from Putnam Heights. I first want to say I think Blake's an excellent guy. Like, this has nothing to do with who the host would be. I submitted a letter. We've heard a lot. I'm not going to prolong your deliberation, and frankly, I don't envy your deliberation. The reason why I'm here is I'm an attorney, and so inherently what I look for is rules. I want to know what the rule is and how to apply the rule every single time. We have in front of you right now, I think the chairman said precedent setting earlier. That's what this would be. This is a first application in a historic preservation district. And I think it is particularly unique because, as I pointed out in my letter, this is not an application where somebody is seeking to rent out a garage apartment, rent out some iteration of already separated property, but rather we're having a request to create, subdivide existing single-family residences in order to accommodate a home sharing ordinance. I think in that particular case, we have to look at the fact that what is being requested here is an exception. It's not the rule. It's the exception to the rule. And so how do you apply an exception, and what is the standard that you're going to apply going forward? We're asking here today, Mr. Gatewood is asking here today, a very, very specific exception, which is the ability to create units within an existing structure and then home share those. And the language, I can't exactly quote it, but I'm going to go with, I don't believe that that concept is in harmony with the overarching concept of historic preservation. Historic preservation came into existence to avoid the destruction of properties and to deal with circumstances where those properties were put to use that were contrary to their historic nature. I certainly am a fan of Airbnb. I've stayed in Airbnbs before. I stayed in an Airbnb last weekend. I think that Airbnbs exist for a reason and that they're a good service. I don't agree with the idea of changing the nature of a property in order to accommodate an Airbnb. And in that regard, it's up to the board going forward what standard you're going to apply. But I think that because of the nature of the request in this instance, if you were to grant this special exception, as I said in my letter, I think the exception begins to swallow the rule. And at what point is something not an appropriate home sharing ordinance? And given that, not an appropriate exception to a home sharing ordinance, and given that it's your obligation to apply the ordinance as written, that although we have arguments from members of our neighborhood who are very invested in the neighborhood that residential zoning is inherently discriminatory, that there are policy changes that should be made. That is certainly something that should be taken up at a level, frankly, well beyond this board. This board is obligated to apply the ordinance that exists, and I think that that ordinance has to have some teeth, and that this board needs to create a decision that they can stand by going forward so that it doesn't become an ad hoc granting or denial of these types of exceptions. I think that I proposed one in my letter. You might suggest a different one, but I think that it would be well within the board's purview, and I think an intelligent policy, to say that when it comes to subdividing existing spaces, that might be a bridge too far.
And I've reviewed your letter quickly, but could you go over your proposed standard?
I effectively would suggest that what this board adopt is an idea that if there is a pre-existing division that doesn't require physical changes to the structure in order to allow for somebody to home share, that this could be a situation where you would grant that type of exception. If there's a garage apartment that already exists, if it's a duplex that remains divided, you can still grant that exception. But where it requires somebody to sheetrock up walls, to block, basically create barriers to segment off one portion of the property from another portion of the property, that is the place where this board could draw a line and say that is not in harmony with the overarching purposes of the zoning policies in play today.
Board members, any questions?
I believe you proposed an alternative.
That is certainly true. I mean, I think that there are a lot of concerns voiced by members of my neighborhood.
For the time period, if the board were to approve it, you had mentioned a 1 year.
Certainly. I think that one of the issues that we're dealing with right now is that nobody knows what this is going to do. There are people on one side who have significant fears. There are people on the other side who think that those fears are just, imagination. And the reality is that within the Historic Preservation District, it is unclear what home sharing is going to do, particularly in properties like this. So to the extent we wind up facing a situation where this board is inclined to grant the exception, my suggestion would be that you grant it for a limited period of time, even a 1 year period of time, so that at the end of that year, maybe it's the case that some of these individuals no longer oppose it. Maybe it's the case that they do oppose it. But at least at that point, this board would have in front of it information which it could say, this is the consequence of this decision.
I didn't see anyone else signed up to speak. Was there anyone else? Okay, sir.
Esteemed members of the board, my name is Jan Post. I live at 1435 Northwest 38, which is west of the property currently under discussion. My wife and I, Yolanda, have lived there since January 2004, and we are both retired educators. We bought the house for 2 reasons. The first reason is we like old homes very much. Before we moved to Oklahoma City in 2001, we lived in Galveston, where we had an old Victorian house from 1867, so we are familiar with historic districts. And interestingly, it used to be a rooming house before the district was turned into a historic district, back to residential property, because the city of Galveston saw the importance of residential houses to maintain the character of historic districts. So that might be a good example here to follow. Now, Suzanne already mentioned that the neighborhood associations were formed to help to maintain the historic neighborhoods, and they started initiatives that were of mutual benefit to all the homeowners. And that's an important point. The actions of the neighborhood association are to mutual benefit of the homeowners. On the other hand, if you look at home sharing, which is driven by profit motive, is only for the benefit of one owner, not for the whole neighborhood. So it's a very different activity that does not fit into the general fabric of historic neighborhoods. Our main concern with the proposal is that the approval would create a precedent and that many more applications would follow. So where does it end? That's our main concern. Putnam Heights has many large houses that could easily be converted to rooming houses, Airbnbs, and what have you. Home sharing is ill-defined, is our concern. What is allowed? Is there a limit on the number of units per home? All of these are unanswered questions. Investors might move in at some point and tear up the fabric of the neighborhood. The founding fathers of Oklahoma City intended for Putnam Heights to be a purely residential area without any commercial activity. And that's why we like it so much. We should honor them by respecting their intentions. My wife and I urge the Board of Adjustment to help us maintain the welcoming and open character of Putnam Heights by disapproving home sharing, a commercial activity that will sow divisions in our community and diminish its historic character. Once a historic neighborhood is gone, it's gone forever. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gatewood?
Yes, just a few brief comments, if that's okay. So first, I just want to say that I love my neighborhood. I really cherish the fact that I live in a historic neighborhood, and I really do enjoy all of my neighbors. I've spoken with a lot of them individually as this process has gone through, and I don't love that I have to stand here and have this adversarial context with the neighbors I live next to. But I just want to say, if this is approved and as we move forward, I plan to keep great relationships with my neighbors and address concerns as it pertains to home sharing as we move forward. I'm a reasonable neighbor, and I don't intend to hold this against anyone, or I plan for it to be a team effort even moving forward. A lot's been made about precedents in this case, and I think it is true. I'm the first person to come before you for an exception in a historic neighborhood. But I think it's also very important that while this may carry some weight, every single person who's applying for a special exemption or who wants to home share and lives in a historic neighborhood will have to go before you, and will have to go before the historic board and get their recommendation. So I want to make it clear that there's still a lot of safeguards in place. It's not that whatever happens here happens wholesale across the board. I've also heard a lot of my neighbors make comments about additions to the law, whether it be only if it's already segmented off as a duplex or only if it's a back house. But I would urge you to follow the law as it is in print right now and not take control of the democratic process and what has already taken place to put this ordinance in place the way it is. My neighbors also claim that if it was a back house, they would be okay with it. I question whether or not that's true, and I would argue actually, in fact, that the fact that the home sharing is actually part of my personal residence actually bolsters my argument and makes even more safeguards in place, because this is the place where my family lives. I live there with my wife and my 2 boys. I would never invite anyone into the home that would jeopardize the safety of my home, and much less the neighbors next door or across the street. I think that's something that is very important to consider, just that, yeah, it is different if it's in a back house, but really, if anything, it being part of the main house makes even more safeguards to the type of concerns that you're hearing. And lastly, finally, I just want to say there is a municipal code in place, and I plan to follow that law to the T. This house is my primary residence, and I plan to be there anytime we're having tenants there. This law was passed specifically to address historic preservation concerns. This very specific paragraph was passed just to appease the historic preservation neighbors and the board. And I've gone before the historic board. I've told them exactly what I'm doing, and they've all agreed unanimously that it does not affect It does not adversely affect either my home or the neighborhood. I think that is of extreme import, as you've heard from my neighbors who are all concerned about the historic preservation of our neighborhood and this home. The board who speaks to those issues has spoken unanimously that they recommend what I'm doing. I just think that this law is the perfect fit for me and what I'm doing. I am a primary residence of this home with my family. I plan to take great care of this home, and I plan to be there when we have tenants coming to rent it out. And so if I don't fit, I don't know who does. Thank you.
Board members, any questions of the applicant before we discuss? Okay. I don't have any questions. I have just general comments for the board, so you can sit down if you like.
Okay.
But, my general comments, they've been expressed before. Ms. Lewis expressed them earlier. The City Council had the opportunity to completely prevent home sharing in HP districts, and it did not do that. I think that is weighty on our decision. I think the precedent and the slippery slope arguments are persuasive, and that's something that we certainly keep an eye on. We're going to discuss later, and we'll discuss at other meetings, modifying the application so that we know exactly how many home sharing permits have been issued in a particular area. And if we see that a particular area is being overrun with home sharing operations, we'll start denying those applications. But these kind of one-off applications here and there in a particular area, I don't think change the character and the fabric of a neighborhood, particularly in such a fantastic neighborhood as this one that I think we would want to show to the world. I think we would want people in that neighborhood and be able to show off what Oklahoma City has to offer, rather than, no offense to any hotels, but putting them in a big corporate hotel chain. And so I tend to agree with the applicant's comments about how this is a particularly unique case in that if his application isn't supported here, I think what we would be doing is overriding the decision of the City Council and saying that no application is going to be granted in HP. And that's kind of, if I could summarize all the arguments from the protestants, it would be they don't want home sharing in HP, period, and that's it. And the City Council has already rejected that. And so I think, to Ms. Lewis's point earlier, the ordinance admits of some kind of exception, and it's up to us to determine what that is. And this is a case where the applicant's going to be living at the property. If this were a case where it was a special exception accompanied by a variance to the condition that the applicant had to be on the premises, we'd have a lot different discussion in HP. But here the applicant's going to be present. I think that militates in favor of the application. There aren't many in this area. I think that militates in favor of the application. The fact that the Historic Preservation Commission, which is the commission that's the least far removed from this area and these types of deliberations, agreed that we should permit this application to continue. So those are my general thoughts, but any other comments from the board are welcome.
Technically, I mean, historic preservation should bring the house back to a duplex, in my view of what historic preservation should be. But that's not going to happen, and I honestly don't. This is exactly what is laid out in the ordinance of what needs to happen. The owner lives in the house. I don't see it as being an issue. And, you know, we give term limits anyways. So, you know, if there is an issue that comes up, you know, we'll get back again and we can review it again. But no, I believe everything has been met for a special exception in this case.
I'll second the comments from the previous members of the board. And I also want to add on some of the previous cases that we've seen. We do understand the neighbors' concerns and the concerns for the neighborhood. We have seen houses that have more than one bedrooms for rental, and we have put stipulations on how the listings can be. I know you mentioned it's a one-bedroom house, and that's how you will be marketing the property if this special exception is granted. And we do put some conditions on it. So, you know, if having that listing and making sure you only advertise, obviously, the one bedroom that you're putting in the application, limiting the number of vehicles that will be parked. Those might be things that, traffic is the one thing that I've heard from most of the neighbors. So.
To reiterate what I said earlier, this is legislation. We are not authorized to change legislation made by the council. The council adopted this ordinance that permitted the granting of a special exception in historic preservation districts. There were not carved out exceptions except in Putnam Heights, or if it's only going to have this kind of structure or this kind of thing. But it put a bigger burden on anyone in a historic preservation district by requiring those individuals to have a special exception application and that it be approved by us. That's the additional step, even though you happen to reside in the premises. Having said that, there are standards for special exception approval, and I believe that the findings and recommendations by the Historical Preservation District, which I would want to incorporate in our findings specifically, is that it does not appear to have an adverse effect on the character of the specific property or the historic district as a whole. The introduction of home sharing is proposed by the applicant, utilizes existing spaces that are consistent with the historical condition of the property, and that does not require alterations to the exterior of the home. The introduction of home sharing as proposed indicates that the volume of home sharing rentals and the owner's intention of be living on site at the time of the rentals minimizes the impact of home sharing. There was some discussion about possible traffic, but I think that's speculative this time. But we have in the past, with knowing concerns, limited the application to the granting of the special exception to a period of 1 year. And in this particular case, I could back a period of special exception be granted for a period of 1 year. That way, it gives everybody some additional time as we settle in with these ordinances. So, if the applicant would be agreeable to that.
Could I speak to that point?
Sure.
I'm just curious what the process would look like. In a year, do I have to pay all the money again and go before HP again, then go to you again? And
Yep.
Okay.
And you have to renew your permit after a year anyway, right? So you'd be going through that permitting process.
Yeah.
And also have to get a special exception after a year. And after a year, maybe you get some of the protestants on board with you, and they support it, and they'd say, we don't mind if it goes for 2 years now or something.
Yeah.
You might get a longer one, but with some of these, with as disputed as these are, and we're kind of in uncharted territory in a lot of respects on these, I know the board's not comfortable granting something for very long periods in some of these different areas. And so I would support, I think, a year. But in addition to that, I would want further restrictions. So the ordinances that were passed allow us, under number 6 and 7 of these conditions, so the board can add additional restrictions. I would add some additional restrictions similar to what we've done in the past. In particular, on the condition that it cannot be marketed as having more than one room available. And so on any advertisement, it has to be marketed as only one room, one sleeping quarters, whatever that means. And if you're found to be in violation, if anyone that gets approved is found to be in violation of that by advertising it as 2 or 3 rooms, the special exception is immediately revoked. And so that's one of the conditions that came to mind, is in any kind of advertising, you would advertise it as being 1 room. And also a maximum of 2 to 3 people, at least for this short period of time. And then that can be extended if we see that there are no issues. In addition to that, if any of the protestants had any other conditions that they would like, I think that would go toward some of these conditions that we need to meet for a special exception, in particular that it's not an adverse impact on the surrounding properties. So if there are any ideas you have on other conditions that the board might consider, I welcome those thoughts.
Can I just speak, please?
Sure.
My objection to this is not about it being a historic structure. my objection to this is that when I bought my home, that this had been an issue that had already been decided, that these homes were going to be single-family homes. Now, essentially, we're going to allow the other front door to enter into another temporary home that's going to be constant rotation of people, however many rentals there are in a month. And that really isn't the nature of what I bought into when I purchased my home in this neighborhood. In fact, it was the reassurance that this was decided by this board, that this was not going to occur, that these were now decided they were single-family homes. As I said, I could easily, without doing any work, have people live in my upstairs. There's a full kitchen, but that's not how I bought this home under the... I bought this home under the rules that were
I understand.
in place.
I understand that, but we've been given some instructions from City Council, and I won't opine.
I understand, and I also want to talk
but-
about traffic. We also absorb traffic and parking from businesses along Classen. There was an incident, I'm a nurse, I said, there was an incident when the neighbor across the street had to have his sister stand in the street so he could back his car out because of all the parking that was on our street. He was struck by his sister. He was an elderly man. He ended up, I assisted him into the car so he could go to the hospital. He subsequently died from that injury. So traffic is a big issue on our street, especially when the business is parked there. And we have a boutique hotel going in adjacent across the street on Classen. So there is going to be more traffic that we're absorbing on 38th Street. So, I mean, it is a concern. There's more than just the historic.
I understand. I'm limiting the comments at this point to conditions in addition to the one-year condition and the one-room condition. So if there are any comments on that particular issue.
In fairness to Blake, I think that he said that there was a living room and a bedroom, so I don't.
I understand.
So as long as he gets not in trouble for having two rooms.
Right. That's why sleeping quarters or something, but.
I do like the idea of you guys talking about the conditions. I think that's something that this thing has kind of been, I think there was so much, it's been so acrimonious from the beginning of like how we're going to do this, and maybe that's a conversation, but I do want to talk about the looming thing here, and this is something I brought up with HP. I think everyone really likes the overall fabric of the neighborhood. I think the one thing that could be more detrimental to that than anything is if Mr. Gatewood decides to just go put that house up for rent, and next thing you know, there's 8 cars parked out front, and there's 8 people. So maybe this doesn't get approved, and maybe Blake says, hey, Miles, let's list this house and let's put it up on the market, and then let's see what that looks like.
I understand. That's a similar thought that I had. If you didn't have home sharing here in that room, you could rent the room out, and I think there'd be more traffic potentially than home sharing, right? And at least the home sharing itself is not causing additional traffic that other uses that you could legally do wouldn't also carry. If there are any comments specifically on conditions, we will welcome those comments. Could you?
Right now, the house actually, there is nothing in there. The living room and the dining room are one big space. So
for the
what
record,
he is going
could you state your name and address for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Yolanda Post, and I live on 1435 Northwest 38th Street on the west side of this beautiful house.
And then what conditions specifically would you like the board to
What
entertain?
I want to just add is that the house right now, it's an open space, living room, dining room, totally open. So what he's going to do for this one unit, for the 1 year, what I like that he only gets 1 year to see how it works out, but he's going to put in a kitchenette. The kitchen is taken out. So he has to put in a kitchenette and he has to sheetrock that place. So he has to change the property for 1 year. That's just what I want to add to this.
Board members?
I'd like to comment or question Chair on this. The one room available, there's a living room and there's a kitchen area. And one room meaning one sleeping room, big because they're all interconnected. And I think we approve the one room with the two other areas which are not sleeping accommodations. Otherwise, you have to hide and say, I didn't see this kitchen, or I didn't, you know. I just think maybe one room needs to be expanded, being one sleeping room.
I agree. Any other comments from the board? Do we have a motion? I think the conditions that I would put forward would be 1 year. It'd be advertised as one room for sleeping and a kitchen or living center, you know, whatever you want to call that, but one room for sleeping specifically, limited to 2 to 3 people, and no street parking. Is that no street parking, so that you don't add parking on the street? Is that something that?
I mean, I would rather not make no street parking at all, just because that's the only parking I have available right now. There did used to be a second driveway, and maybe down the road, that's something I look at, making a circle drive or more driving space off the street. But I do anticipate a lot of tenants to be Ubering in town or whatever, but I think that really limits what I'm able to do if I say you can't have a parking spot at all.
Okay, I wasn't sure what your off-street parking situation was, so could you advertise it as strictly one automobile only or something like that?
Yeah, would it be okay to do 2? Is that
up
too much?
to the board? I mean, but
I think 2 would be more reasonable, and I don't think we really can be restricting the public parking of the street.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of how it's advertised, and not obviously enforceability is going to be an issue, but how it's advertised would deter particular people that might want to have a party there or something. So.
Before, I think we've limited it to 2 cars on one of Wilshire, so I would go along with 2 cars, and so you're suggesting perhaps one sleeping room available, advertised minimum 2 to 3, maximum 2 to 3 people, with the adjacent kitchen and there was another room, I thought, kitchen and living room.
And then strictly 2 cars maximum. Yeah. So, is there a motion?
Could I speak to the 1 year too? I'm not opposed to 1 year, but it is still a pretty confined time. I would be much more comfortable with 2 years, where I have time to actually get into the flow of inviting people in and out. And
I understand. I don't think you're going to get the board on board with you there.
Okay.
Some of these other ones, we've done several there that have been just a year, and I understand it's definitely not the easiest thing, but these are very difficult decisions that we have to make. There were some where I was thinking 6 months. That's how difficult the decision is, and see how it goes for 6 months, you know. And so I think a year is about as long as I'm comfortable with on this one, but I'm only one member of the board. So.
Okay. So just to be clear, 1 year, there's 1 sleeping room, 3 people max, 2 cars max.
Depending on what
I'm good with that.
Depending on what kind of motion I get.
Okay.
Yeah.
I so move. No, I move to approve case number 14624 for the reason that the standards for the special exception approval have been met. I would incorporate, and I will qualify what that will be, but I want to incorporate the standards. I want to incorporate the standards as set forth in staff report. I also want, and I concur with the findings, that all the standards have been met. I also want to incorporate the 3 comments and findings of the HP Commission, which I have read earlier, that it be incorporated in the findings. And this approval would be for a period of 1 year from the date of the issuance of the license. So once the license is issued, your licensing mechanism is for a year anyway. So it's 1 year from the issuance of the license on the following conditions, that there will only be, that your advertisement for your home sharing would be for one sleeping room available for 2 or 3 people maximum, parking of 2 cars, 2 automobiles, and that that one sleeping room available next to that would be that adjacent living room and kitchen. So, but one sleeping room. So that would be my motion. I think I've included everything.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve case number 14624 for the reasons that it meets the statutory conditions for a special exception, subject to the conditions set forth in the motion. Cast your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Thank you.
Back to item number 8, which I don't believe the applicant is here.
Out of courtesy to the applicant, I request a one-time continuance to the next Board of Adjustment meeting, which will be September 5th, I believe. So if I have a motion for that, I will say for the record, I don't know what your attendance is going to be like. I won't be available, I don't think. I think I'll have a trial on that date. And so if anyone else is not available, then we might not be able to.
Coming down with a cold already.
I understand that you are here to speak, but without the applicant here, we generally grant a one-time continuance, and after that, we withdraw or deny the motion. So, is there a
motion? Continue.
Second.
Motion and a second to continue item number 8 to the September 5th meeting. Cast your votes, please. And it's approved. I believe every other item was continued. Are there any additional items? Communications reports from the board?
I believe at the last meeting you mentioned that we were going to address some of other information that we might want to put in some of these forms that we received. Is that something we're covering today, or?
We can. Do you have time? Okay. So we put out there in one of the other meetings, in case anyone in the public wanted to have any comments on changing the application process. One thought that I had is a separate application, one for a variance, one for a special exception, and one for an appeal. And it sets forth the standards, whatever makes your job easier, Mr. Wilson, in that application. I would want to include in all those applications, if anyone's going to be representing the applicant, that person's disclosed. I think the statutory conditions for a variance, for the variance application set forth, same thing for the special exception, same thing for an appeal. And then in addition to that, for the special exceptions, if it's going to be a special exception in one of these home sharing cases, I think we all want some more information on that. And we're all in, this is new to everyone, but I think we'd want some information, because what we see is an application that essentially has the address, the name and the address, and no support. And then we get all these protest letters that are fully supported, and it's almost not fair to the applicant. And so a special application, or a part of that special exception application for the home sharing cases, which would include how many home sharing permits have been approved within a certain period or a certain distance. I think maybe half a mile. Is that, is that appropriate, you think? Or is that easy to do, John? Or
Say that again.
To do within half a mile, how many home sharing permits have been approved? Or are there within a half mile of the applicant?
So I checked with License Division, and IT is working on a mapping situation where they'll be able to map every location. They don't have it yet. They're working on it. I don't know the time period on that. But yes, as soon as we can get something like that, I have no problem. On the applications, I would suggest...
I was going to ask if the ones that have been grandfathered in, that they have to get a permit as well, right? So is that
yes,
something that we can put them?
They still have to have a license. So
Yeah.
there's license for all of these, even the ones that were grandfathered, they're all licensed. But my understanding from the License Division and from Development Center, they don't have the capability right now, but they expect to have it within a couple of months. That's what they're telling me. That's
just a GIS thing.
it's a GIS thing. And they're already working on it on other things, so this will fit in perfectly. On the application, I could come up with 3 applications and bring in and let you guys review them and give me some critique on.
That was my thought, is maybe have a draft and that includes our comments today, if anyone has comments, and then you could incorporate those so we're not going back and forth too much. But circulate drafts to the board. If anyone wants to redline those, we can redline those as we see fit, and then present those at a meeting in case any of them in the public has a comment on it.
Maybe have not the next meeting, you're not going to be here. Perhaps we can add it on to discussion at the end if it's not too long a docket.
Yeah, in 2 meetings.
I would also add that it's very helpful to have attached to the home sharing, because they are required to give their purpose and the detailed description of their proposal. And I would ask that those, it doesn't have to be all the attachments, but their application language on the home sharing at least be attached to our agenda documentation.
One question I have, just do we just want one special exception, or do we want one specifically for home sharing?
I'm
there's
one for home sharing for sure, but
and then a special exception for all the rest, which is child care,
medical,
medical hardship.
We're getting 4 or 5 agenda items a meeting, and then the question gets in: what are you going to use and what's your purpose? So I think if we have that application physically before us, it was before the HP Commission. That's how I saw it. So I think it's just helpful to have it with our documentation and the actual application review before.
And I will add, if the information that we gather from them is not that different, maybe in the application itself you have a special section for home sharing, or what you will provide us to have information about home sharing, because I feel like we get so many cases and we're asking a lot of the same questions, how many bedrooms are you going to rent? Some stuff that is already being provided to, to the city when they fill out the form.
I think that how many rooms you're anticipating advertising, or if it's the entire property, and then how many properties you have licenses and permits for already. I know that's a concern of some members on the board, is if someone's got 100 different properties or something, the board would like to know that. So, any other additions to the application? Okay. Citizens to be heard? Seeing none, we are adjourned.